Imagine for a moment that you are a road-weary traveler. You're tired, you're hungry, and wondering if there will ever be a safe place to rest. You've been told there's an outpost ahead that provides safety, information for the road ahead, and people who understand what the journey is like. You keep scanning the horizon, hoping against hope that it will be there. Then, as you come over a rise in the terrain, you suddenly catch a glimpse of it. There it stands, beckoning you to come and find the rest you need. You're moments away from the outpost. Well, greetings and welcome, everybody, to finally another edition of the Outpost podcast. I'm Dr. Ray Mitsch, your host. I have been absent for the last 2 months. The last episode I did was 2 days before the knee replacement. I am now 8 weeks out, and by all my records, it would indicate that I have been 2 months absent. And so my apologies for that being the case. It took that long for me to get back into a headspace to be able to think about even doing something like this. And there's been a lot of developments over the summer that are worth talking a little bit about, because that's what we do. We talk about that in the Outpost. We talk about life as we know it. And just for people that are tuning in for the very first time, never have done this before, or have heard a little bit about it, which is not likely because we have gone silent for so long. But the Outpost is really a digital place where we are building bridges back to faith, or strengthening bridges of faith that are ultimately built on the relationships and on authenticity, on grace and truth, on knowing and being known. It's all built on that. That is very much a part of this place, this digital place that we're calling the Outpost. My hope will be that in some time in the future, we will actually have a physical place to call the Outpost. And it's not a church. It's not a small group. It is, a group of fellow companions and traveling companions, where we want to create this space of where the doubters and the wounded and the confused and the beat up and beat down and bent and bruised, who feel like their lives have been a disappointment to God, can feel accepted enough to be known and know others. And that's really what this is all about. We want to be a place where people can bump into Jesus and not as they have been told he is, but as he really is. And that's usually embodied in the relationships we have with one another. And that's really what this is meant to do. So at least initially it might be digital, whether that's an online group or something like that. But eventually, Lord willing, it could actually be a physical one. So with that, I'm going to start out a new series, and I am calling it Relationships in the Outpost. And so pull up a chair, get comfortable, relax, and let's look at this a little bit. Now, what I want to do is I want to start out with a quote, and I know that's kind of dangerous because people tend to zone out the minute you have this lengthy kind of quote. But what I want to do is talk about the kind of community of people that we're seeking to become in the Outpost and the Outpost groups. And if you know the tagline of Stained Glass International, you know that it's communities of the soul and outposts for the heart. And that's what this is really all about. So what this quote is it comes from actually the what do I want to say? One of the originators of AA, and Sam Shoemaker was the inspiration. Maybe that's the better way to put it, and the inspiration for the AA groups. And he describes it this way, and there are some elements to this that I think are really important for us to understand and think about. So here's the quote. He says, "It is creative with imagination about each one in the group and its work as a whole, watching for authentic new vision coming from any one of them. It is expectant, always seeking to offer to God open and believing hearts and minds through which he can work out his will, either in the sometimes startling miracles he gives or in steady purpose through long stretches where there is no special opening. It may fairly be said that one enmeshes himself in this redemptive community. He lessens his chances if he doesn't do this. Let me back up. It may fairly be said that unless one enmeshes himself in this redemptive fellowship, he lessens his chances of steady growth and effectiveness in his Christian life and experience." And that's Sam Shoemaker from the book, The Experiment of Faith. It was written in 1957, which sounds really, really long ago. To me, it doesn't, but I won't follow up on that. The thing to pay attention to, even when we start re-engaging the conversation of the dialogue about what kind of community of people do we want to be a part of, or what kind of community do we want. And what's interesting to me is that if you want to know what drives a community of people, all you really have to do is watch what they do with problems, how they talk about problems, how they frame them, how they, the questions they ask, which says something about how they see the problem that a person has. And another way to think about this is when a member of a community is confronted with someone who's struggling, all you have to do is watch for four different things. So 4 different things, and it will reveal what drives the community. Because, see, the reality is that today, in a larger sense, we have gotten very influenced by the brain and the body, but we don't talk nearly as much about the soul because it's immaterial. And by us not talking very much about it, it's basically saying that the soul is not really all that relevant. What's really relevant is what's going on in the brain and what's going on in the body. So I think we have to think about the kind of community that you want to create, or better yet, the kind of community that you actually create. And so there are 4 different things we have to look at. First of all, we have to look at how do they think through the person's problem and what it takes for him or her to change. So how do they frame the problem? How do they understand it? And what do they believe is the core thing that will bring about the change that the person might want? And that's key, because how I frame the problem has everything to do with how I go about trying to change it. And if I frame it in a particular way, then I will do it. I will seek to change it in a particular way. So if I see the problem that I'm having with depression as solely a brain problem, a lot of times we've had that conversation in even everyday conversation. We still do today, where we talk about it. It's a chemical imbalance in the brain. Well, it's a lot more than that, quite honestly. It's not just the chemical imbalance in the brain, but if I'm going to frame it that way, as a chemical imbalance in the brain, then if I fix the chemical imbalance, then the depression will lift. And let me boil it down even farther. If I take a pill, then my depression will lift. And oftentimes that is simply not true. I have been in the mental health field for over 40 years, and I have yet to see that happen. And the reality is there is this immaterial thing about us, not just the chemicals, quote unquote, chemicals in our brain. They're called neurotransmitters, if you were wondering. And it's more than that. I can change somebody's chemistry imbalance in their brain. That doesn't necessarily translate into how they relate to somebody or even the conclusions they make. Chemicals can't do that. And so the immaterial part of us is what we think and the conclusions we make and the narratives we hold. So that's one. The first one is how they think through the problem, and then how do they frame that problem in such a way to come up with how do they change? The second one is how do you understand what's wrong with the person? I mean, we can say, I see the problem as a thought problem, and then I deal with the thoughts, and that's what takes for change. But what's problematic about that? I mean, what's problematic about thoughts that are toxic or negativistic or helpless and hopeless and those sorts of things? So that's the second one. The third one, how do they enter into somebody's life in order to help? Do they have instructions? Do they have assignments? Do they have scripture reading? What do they have that they believe is important to help somebody change? How do they move into somebody's life? And in a lot of cases, the questions I ask give away the way that I think about the other person and their problems, for that matter. And then the fourth one is by what they are saying and doing in a person's life, what are we to assume? So based on the things that we've seen them do and say and how they enter into people's lives and everything else, what can we conclude about what they assume to be Jesus's core message to that person? Because the reality is we move into somebody's world, we are Jesus with skin on for them. In a lot of cases, we are. And they make conclusions on who Jesus is by how we relate, by how we attack a problem, how we approach a problem, whatever that might be. So there are basically 4 different communities of people that I want to try to talk about and what drives them, what moves them along. And I may or may not be able to get through this entirely. And if I don't, I'll just pick it up next time. I think we'll probably tackle the first 2, and then we'll do the third one next time, and then land on the fourth one, which I think is the important one. But I think you got to have a sense of what the landscape looks like and the kinds of community that you can enter into that all have a role to play, but they're just limited. They just are limited. So, so 4 communities of people. What is it that drives them? And the first one I want to talk about is what I call the principle-driven community. And the people in this community believe that really the only way to think through a person's problem is to discover what biblical principles they're violating. And once they have that figured out, then their effort is to exhort or challenge or admonish or instruct the person to change. That's their strategy. And a lot of communities within the church are principle-driven communities. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that's all wrong. It's just disconnected from the needs of the person that it's being directed toward. So folks in this community think that the key element of helping somebody with a problem is finding out what biblical principles they've violated and then exhort and instruct and push toward, through whatever means, push toward living out that biblical principle. And in summary, in the condensed sense, yeah, I buy that. But how we get there matters. It's called process. What is the process that it takes us to get there? So in this way of thinking, the key element for change is the strength of the person's determination and willpower. And they understand what is wrong with a person only in terms of the principle the person has violated. They do not think of the person in terms of what's wrong with them as something bigger than just the principle that's been violated. It's been violated. Let's get it fixed. Let's adjust and make adjustments to what you do and how you even connect with God, or whatever that might be, and then everything's good, right? Everything is good. So people in this community, a principle-driven community, usually enter into people's life through instruction, through exhortation, which is admonishment, challenging, pushing, and then holding the person accountable for change. And by watching these folks, I would assume that their understanding of what Jesus' message to people is you're doing something wrong, now change it. And in a lot of cases, just as a sidelight, in a lot of cases, I think this generation, Gen Z, has seen a lot of principle-driven communities, and they have probably even grown up in those communities. The problem is that something is missing, and that something is what they tend to talk a lot about and judge the entire world by, and that's in terms of how it feels. Now, the feelings are not irrelevant. They are important, but they are not all important. They are not all there is. Okay, so that's the first one, principle-driven. They see the person as violating some biblical principle. Let's set that straight and get you on the straight and narrow. That's where we get that phrase. And then everything will be good. And then if you violate it again, that will come back. Now, the one thing I will tell you is that the principle-driven community is extremely prone to shame. And shame is not guilt. Guilt, there's a difference between those. And let me just tell you what they are, because it will pop up with some of these other communities as well. Because guilt is, I have done something wrong. I have violated some standard, and I need to repair that and change that behavior to bring it back into line with what I have done that is wrong. Okay? So it's behaviorally based. It's behaviorally focused, if you will. So guilt is about behavior. Shame, on the other hand, is about my personhood and who I am. So maybe I have done something bad, and if I have done something bad, then I am a bad person. And that's shame. And principle-driven communities are very prone to cultivating an environment for shame. The conclusions people in these communities make is, I just can't get anything right. I'm never good enough. I never can do anything right. I'm just a loser. And so God's grace is wonderful because that's for losers too. Whatever. So, and that's the principle-driven community. And now, I'm not busting them. There's a lot about this that is a good thing. It is a good thing, except that it is limited, and it does not communicate. I believe it doesn't communicate the core message of Jesus to us in terms of becoming more like him. Not just change, but becoming more like him. And so that's the first one. The second one, the second community of people that I want to highlight is what I would call the support-driven community. And for these folks, their first impulse when they're talking to a struggling person is to do all they can to understand the struggles and the pain. And that's great. We need more people who are willing to listen and understand the struggle and the pain. Unfortunately, a lot of people believe that if they spend too much time there, they are then giving the person permission to stay there. And that's taking on a responsibility that isn't theirs. Let me just put it that way. So for them, the key to personal change then revolves around the level of honesty the person displays. he or she displays. So how honest are they about the struggles and the pain that they have? And if this sounds vaguely familiar, it is very much found in a lot of support groups. They encourage this kind of honesty and this kind of authenticity about the things that the people are struggling with. They don't offer any solutions, but it's just simply the identification and clear communication of what that is. So they see any kind of honesty as the only way to support and encourage the person. And that's really what they're all about. They primarily understand the person in terms of unexpressed pain that he or she is laboring under. And for them, the way to enter into a person's life is primarily through non-judgmental listening. And so they listen not to find a conclusion or not to find, as the other community, a principle that's been violated. They are listening simply to communicate a sense of acceptance and non-judgment. And so it's embedded in here that they're saying, yeah, I get it. They may have been there too, but they really are trying to give the context in which the person can freely communicate and honestly communicate what it is they're experiencing. And that's it. And so by watching these folks, we can assume that they believe Jesus' core message to people is that you're hurting and I want to soothe your pain. And the key there, like I said before, is they assume that his core message is you're hurting and I want to soothe your pain. Excuse me. The question is it the core message? Is it the only one? So that's that one. And then I guess I do have time. The third community here of people that I want to talk about, excuse me, is what I call the insight-driven crowd. And these folks look at a person as psychologically disordered. Now our culture has gotten more and more psychologically minded and sophisticated, even not entirely sophisticated. They might think they are, but they're not really. But these folks look at the person as being psychologically disordered, and what they're attempting to do then is to discern what's wrong so they can fix it and what the psychological disorder is. Now, again, there is a danger in this because it is very easy to make a short leap from the disorder I have to who I am. Okay, so the disorder defines the person. That's the danger here, all right? So for them, the key thing to develop in the other person is the psychological insight needed to make the changes that they need to make. Now, there's dangers everywhere in that, because the biggest assumption that comes in is that if I have enough insight, then I'll change. And that's just fundamentally not true. It doesn't wash in the world that we live in. I know a lot of people that know everything about their disorder and they don't make any changes at all, but they have great insight into it. It's not motivating enough, really. And even in AA, they have the phrase that, for most addicts, they won't change when they see the light. They only change when they feel the heat. In other words, when they feel the consequences of the choices that they're making. So, as you would guess, for this bunch of people, the way to understand a person is always in terms of some kind of internal damage. Now, let me remind you again, each one of these things has a part to play, but it is very unidimensional. It's very unitary in its approach. It is not multivariate or including many variables that we have to take into account when we're dealing with people. So how these people attempt to help is their efforts are largely directed toward helping the person to uncover the damage they've suffered from, interpret what is wrong, and then provide the necessary insight to help them change their patterns of relating. And that's, again, there's some validity to that. It's not only that, though. And that's where some of this problem comes in. So this community's assumption is that Jesus's core message is, you're disordered. So let's get the disorder dealt with and everything will be better. And that's really, in a lot of cases, even in this generation of young people, that's a lot of how they see it. They ascribe to something that would be called the moralistic therapeutic deism, that God's here to help me, not necessarily for me to become more like him. So now, before I wrap it up, before I look at the last community, and I'll do that on the next episode, let me say unequivocally that the communities that we just talked about are not summarized as I did to caricature them. Caricatures obviously accentuate certain features of a person's characteristics. If you ever see a caricature of Jay Leno, you'll see his chin. If you see a caricature of David Letterman, another late night host, it was the gap in his teeth. So caricatures can be used to help us understand kind of the key things about this person or about this community of people that we need to know the most about. And it helps us identify kind of the group of people that we're interacting with. So the reality is that there is truth in each one of these. But there's something missing too. And so we need to find a type of community that combines the best of all of these. And so there are some key questions that I want to leave with, and then I'll get to the last community in the next episode. The first question is, how do we move away from principle-driven community without losing our moral moorings, our moral standards? Because that's really what it is about, is violating a principle, a biblical principle. So with the principle-driven community, how do we move away from that without losing the moral standards that is prevalent in the conversations there? In the support-driven community, how do we move beyond it without losing kindness and listening and acceptance? And then how do we move beyond the insight-driven community without losing an awareness of just how complex and deep the human soul is? Because each one looks at this mosaic of what a human is and focuses on a very small piece. And so my question I leave you with really is, how do we move beyond any of these communities to be a redemptive community that maintains morality, that maintains supportiveness, and maintains kindness? Because that is the combination of a redemptive community that allows people to be known and know others. And in that interaction, Jesus then can be known. And Jesus actually becomes relevant, I think, quite honestly. So I will leave it there. There's the one last community I want to talk about. And when I do, it will begin to make some sense, I certainly would hope. So as I said at the very beginning, there are a few end of program reminders that I typically do. SGI-net.org is the home for SGI community. The thing that I need to make you aware of is the summer is awful for nonprofit organizations, and we are just like that. We are on life support, folks, quite honestly. that we are in a very deep water right now. And so I need not only help volunteers to help do a variety of tasks, whether that's with social media or with the website or any number of things, but I also need and covet your prayers for people that financially are willing to support what we're trying to accomplish here, not only with the groups, but also with the retreats and making those possible. There's a lot happening at my primary place of work at CCU, and I feel a very strong inclination that we need to be as self-sustaining as we possibly can, rather than depending on CCU to come alongside of us. And so that requires money, just flat out, it requires money. And we need donations. All the donations are tax deductible for people that are willing to give. And it supports the website. It supports the creation of resources. It supports the trainings that right now are on hold because I can't divide myself enough ways to do it. And I, I'm working on one of the current projects is a e-course that people might be interested in participating in about shame and grace, and I hope to have that ready to roll in the fall. And when it does, then that again would be another means to support our ministry here. Another means, a few other means, is the digital devotional. It is called Setting New Boundaries. It's built on having healthy relationships. You get a devotional once every week for 2 years. And it just keeps you on track, keeps you encouraged, gives you new ideas about, and maybe some new ideas, maybe some old reminders of about boundaries and relationships, which I believe is one of the most critical elements in having a healthy relationship. The other thing to check out is kind of a new podcast that I started producing as part of Outpost Media that is called Unscripted, the collected wisdom of life, living, and sorrow. For those of you guys that have followed the podcast from Psych Monologue days to now the Outpost, I experienced a very significant loss in March. And I'm basically wheeling myself up to the mic here in the Northern Command Post, turning it on, and just musing on a variety of things in terms of life, living, and sorrow. That there's always this subcontext, I think, in terms of our lives about the sorrow we experience, the things that we lose, the changes we experience, and all of that. And so it doesn't have any series or particular direction other than what's been percolating in my own head from conversations I have or the things that I hear from. So you can follow us on all 3 social media outlets. Instagram, it's at SGI_international. At Facebook, at SGI as Stained Glass International. And then and in LinkedIn at Dr. Mitsch. So you can subscribe. The more you subscribe to our podcast, my podcast, the more it pushes it up in the searches, so that people can be interested in what we're doing and what we're trying to do. The other thing just to keep in mind is that there is a book store, SGI store, on the website that allows you to check out the 2 books that I have written on grief. One is Grieving the Loss of Someone You Love, that was written many years ago, but still is going strong. And then the newest release in January called The Seasons of Our Grief. And it gives us an opportunity, gives the reader an opportunity to follow along people's lives as they try to navigate the grief in their lives. And that's really been that was, like I said, just released, and it is available on the website for a little bit of a discount. You can purchase it through Amazon or anywhere else that you get books. You can find it there as well. So if you're interested in partnering with us, we would be ever so grateful to build our scholarship fund and our general ministry fund to be able to do the things that we need to do, that hopefully people are interested in and depend on. All the donations are tax deductible, and that would support our silent retreats and also all the other resources that we have on the website itself. So the merchandise is there, the even window stickers, if you want to, every little bit helps. It's a window sticker that says Esse Quam Videre on it, and it allows you to let other people know about SGI and the Outpost podcast. And I think that probably covers a whole bunch of it. If you prefer to write a physical check, you certainly can do that. Just make it out to SGI and send it in to P.O. Box 322, Eastlake, Colorado, 80614. You can donate online if you'd rather do that. And that will go to support and ultimately encourage people to try out a different kind of community of people that they might have an opportunity to learn who the biblical Jesus is in their relationships with one another and finding out about him. So I think that's it for tonight. Thanks so much for joining me. I appreciate you and you as my listeners. And until next week, which I will be here waiting for you. Love you. Later. Bye.